All right. Hello again. So in this video we're going to go through a lot of the text formatting CSS that is in your book, but it's also just some of the general text formatting CSS. So I have this start file for you, and it has a bunch of paragraphs and maybe a couple of other things, and they all have, or most of them have, a class applied already, so you don't have to worry about that. But remember that if you were going to do it this way with classes, you would have to apply the class by saying class equals font 6 or font 7 or whatever. Those aren't very good names for classes either, by the way, but for our purposes, though, they should work okay. I also have, we're doing embedded styles, so we're doing them up here in the head. So we can just stick them up in the top here and go ahead and go from there. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to make a default font size for the page, and this is kind of a best practices, current best practices way to do it. And you see I have some code hinting in this app, but I'll try not to use it so that you can kind of see what are the possibilities for the different attributes. So I'm going to say font size 100%, and what that will do is basically set the default font size to the user's default font size. So we really haven't changed anything, but you kind of establish a baseline. And then we will use some sizing CSS to resize some text from there. So the default font size usually is about 16 pixels for most browsers, so you can think of 100% as 16 pixels. So it doesn't really change anything because we're already kind of at the default size, but it will make a difference when we start doing relative units. So the first, we'll add another CSS style, so I'll say dot font 1. And for this one, I'm going to, and you can see my editor is putting in my brackets for me, but you have to put in the brackets, obviously. We're going to just do font family, and we've done this before. So this is kind of review, but just a couple of extra little points about it. I'm going to put in Trebuchet MS, and then a comma, and then Verdana. If I could type Verdana, and a comma, and then Arial, and then comma Helvetica. And comma, and end with sans serif. Good, I think that's it. So we have Trebuchet MS, Verdana, Arial, Helvetica, sans serif. So some of the other videos I may not be capitalizing some of these fonts, but technically they are supposed to be capitalized, even though it does usually work anyway. I put in this one because you will see this is a font with two names, or two words in the name, Trebuchet MS. So whenever that happens, you should put quotes around it so the browser does not get confused and try to think of it as two fonts. It's only one font. So you can see up here right now it has changed that font to Trebuchet because this computer has Trebuchet. So this is called a font stack, meaning the browser again is going to use this font or that font or that font or that font in order until it finds one that it has. The default backup is sans serif, meaning a text without serifs, which we'll look at. So just to back up a little bit, there are a couple things about that, and I'm going to go refer to the book a little bit for some of this. So again, we are setting up a font stack where the user will get one of these fonts in order, which the first one that the user's computer has will show up. So that's kind of a limitation for fonts. There is a new process or newish process where you can embed fonts using the @fontface rule. So how does this work? Well, there's a large article basically in your book about it, but the gist of it is you can embed fonts that will download into for the user so that you can use fonts that they normally wouldn't have. There's two main ways to do this. You can host your own fonts, or you can use sort of a font server service. One way to embed fonts and host your own is to use services like Font Squirrel, So let me show you that. This is Font Squirrel. And it has a section called @Font Face Kits. And then you pick a font here, and I'm going through really quickly on this, and you'll have to check it out on your own. And you click on Get Kit, and it will download a font, but not just one font. It will download, or one version of the font. It will download multiple versions of the font, and that is because different browsers like different types of font file formats. Some like OpenType, some like TrueType, and let me show you what I get here. Actually, I'll just show you. So I just downloaded that font, and if I look inside that folder that it gave me 4 different kinds of fonts. It also gave me a demo file and the CSS to make this work, which looks like this. So this is the @FontFace CSS, which allows you to embed this font. And you can, after you do this, and put all the fonts in the right place and put this code into your CSS, you can now use this font called Porticulian Bold. Porticulian? I picked a strange font. Porticulian Bold in your font stack if you want, and it will show up. The catch is you can't just use any old font that's on your computer because you don't have a license to distribute that font. So all these fonts on Font Squirrel have been licensed for that, for this use. There's also paid versions of this too, different services. So that's one option. Another option is to use a font hosting service, which I will show you a popular one for that. One that's called Typekit. And Typekit is a service, used to be independent, now it's part of Adobe. And similar idea, but this one you sign up for it. And it's a paid service, but they will host all the fonts, so you don't have to worry about any of that. All the fonts are licensed. There's a big gallery here where you can pick different font styles or fonts. And here's Browse Fonts. You can see all the different fonts here. And there's a lot of high-quality fonts. So, and they have different pricing structures. Right now, you can use it on one website with a certain number of page views for free. And but you have to use a Typekit badge, and then it goes up from there. So if you're doing a lot of websites with a lot of fonts, you pay a little bit more. But the upside is you don't have to worry about any, rights issues or copyright issues or just distribution or even hosting the actual files for the fonts. That's all on this service. So that's another way to do it. All right, that's probably enough of that. Let's get back to this. All right, so that was font family. And the next one we're going to do is font size. So we'll say .font2, which is our next sentence. And this one we're just going to say font-size. And I'm going to put 1.5 EM. So EM units are a way to size text using relative units. And this is probably the most popular way to do it right now. So what this means is, since we established a size of a base size of 100%, which is basically 16 pixels, by saying 1.5, it's like saying 150%. You can also size with percent actually, but most people use EM units. So what ends up happening is your text gets about 1.5 times the normal size, which looks like this over here on the right. This can get a little tricky. So there is a multiplication factor involved here. So let me show you what I mean. If I go .font2 space EM and I put it at 1.5 EM. Oh, I forgot the font size. Font size. Now, if we look over here in our, let me look down in our code for just a second. Here is our sentence. It says font 2, and then inside of this paragraph there's an EM tag, which is the emphasis tag, right? So here we said for that sentence we wanted it to be, or that paragraph, we wanted it to be 1.5 EM, which is this size. And then we said any EM, which is inside of font 2, we want it to also be 1.5 EM, which sounds like it would be the same, right? But it's not. It's bigger. The reason is it multiplies. So 1.5 times 1.5 is what? Like 2.25. That's why this is bigger. So that can cause issues, and it's done on purpose, and it has a reason. I'm not going to go into it, but there is a reason for this. So if you're thinking like, well, what if I want to make this text not that size? I want to make it 16 pixels. So this is our default size is 16. This should be 16 times 1.5, which is 24, right? And this is more. So what if I want to make this options this size? So there's a formula, and that's also in your book. That is used quite a bit. Let me skip down to it. Skipping. Maybe I'll cut out the skipping, but maybe I won't. Ooh, a lot of skipping. Okay, font size, we're to this point. Wow, I had to skip a lot. Okay. So what happens is your font size gets multiplied. Here it is. Because of this behavior of EM units as relative units. So here's an example from your book that says, the gist of it is your target size divided by the context equals the result. What does that mean? So in this example, here's our body of 100%. That establishes our base size. We have an article that we want to be at 14 pixels. So to get to 14 from 16, you divide 14 divided by 16, you get 0.875. That's why this is 0.875. It's a ratio. But we want the H2 to be 18 pixels. How do we get to 18 from 14? Well, you can't divide by 16 anymore because your context is now 14. So you end up dividing 18 divided by 14, and you get this huge number, 1.28571429. And you'll see that people use these huge decimal points. You can round it off a little bit, but there's really no need to. But it just makes it precise, and there's some rounding errors, I think, supposedly in some browsers that can cause problems. So that's why this number is probably not rounded off. So then you would specify 1 point for your H2 right here. You would say font size 1.2857 blah blah blah, and that gives you a size of 18 pixels if you want to work with pixels. So I know that's complicated and kind of crazy. Just review this, check it out, and see the effect. But that's kind of how it works, and that's the way it's done most of the time. There is something new. I think it's down here. Yes. There is a new unit in CSS called root EM, and it does away with that. So if you wanted your font to be a certain size and not multiply if it's inside of something else that has a font size, you just use REM, not the band, but REM instead of EM, and it will be that size. You don't have to do the multiplication part. Certain browsers, i.e. 8 and earlier, it doesn't work. So that's why there's fallback size of 12 pixels here. So i.e. earlier versions of IE will see this, i.e. 8 and earlier will see this, and everything else will see that, and it should work okay. So I know that's complicated and everything, but that's kind of how it works. So let me just show you what happens if I say, let's say we wanted to get this smaller. And I'm not going to do the multiplication because that's going to take too long for this example. But let's say I do 0.8 EM here. So now I said 0.8, or even if I say 1. If I say 1, you see it's the same size as the surrounding text. So it didn't do anything, even though this is larger than our default size. So I have to go lower. So I'm just going to guess and say 0.8. It's probably a little too much, but you get the idea. So I would end up having to go negative or less than 1, not negative, but less than 1 to get that to be the right size for this EM tag. Wow, that was a lot. Sorry, the rest of these will not take as long. Okay, so let's move on. Let's say dot font 3, and this one we're going to just do color, which we've done before, but we'll do it again. And I'm just going to change the color of the text to red, which is FF0000. And there we go, we have red. So we've done that before. I'm not going to elaborate on that. Many times I think we've done it. The next one we'll do is font 4. And that one we will do font style. So I don't believe we have done this, but if we have, it'll be a good little review. So we'll say font style, and you can see your choices are italic, normal, oblique. These are main choices here. So I'm going to say italic, and that makes your font italic. What's the difference between oblique and italic? Oblique takes the regular font and sort of slants it, or at least that's what it's supposed to do, and italic should serve the actual version of the font that is the italic version of the font. So italic would be the best choice to use if you want to make italicized text. And another aside about that, do not remember, it's not a good idea to make large amounts of body copy into italicized text because it is harder to read. So probably want to avoid that. All right, so let's do the next one. This is font weight. So it's going to be font 5, and we'll say font weight. And that is how thick the font is. So we're just going to say, what should we say? Just say bold. And you can see now this is bold. So your options for font weight are some relative units like bolder and lighter, which I don't think many people use. There's also a numerical system that goes from 100 to 900. That is not particularly reliable yet. It's supposed to be for fonts that have multiple densities or weights, but most don't. Most just have bold or not bold, although some do. So that's what that's for. But generally, you're going to use bold or normal probably for that. Okay, so that's font weight. The next one is font 6, and this one is font variant. So we'll say font variant, and we are going to say small caps. And we should see it over here. And that one's not showing up correctly. Oh, I spelled it wrong. That's right. There, I spelled variant wrong. So it's font variant, and it's small caps. So your choices for that are normal or small caps, and you can see what it looks like. Small caps makes everything capitalized, but it makes the uncapitalized letters slightly smaller and the real capitalized letters slightly higher. So that's called small caps. Kind of specialized. All right, let's do font 7. And this one is the font shorthand. So we're just going to do font this time. And I'm going to say bold. Not bold first, I'm going to say italic. So I'm going to say italic, then bold, then small caps. Then, this is kind of a long one, sorry, 1 EM slash 1.2 EM, space Verdana, comma Arial, comma sans serif. I'm using some of the code hinting to speed up a little bit here. And I think that is it. Yes. So what is all this? This is the font shorthand, which combines a lot of the things we already did with into one rule. So this is shorthand. So this first one is style. The second one is weight. The third one is variant, which we did. This is new. This is a ratio of the size and the line height. So what does that mean? This is the size is 1 EM, which is our default size. 1.2 EM means the line height, or in typographic terms, it's called leading. It's the space between the baselines of the text. So if I look at the text here, the space from there to there is 1.2 EM. If I change that, you'll see it change over here. So I just changed that to 2. Now these lines are more spaced out. So one thing, little tip for typography on the web is you can add a little bit of line height, which is leading, and it makes the text a little bit easier to read and look a little better. So I've added a little bit extra there. And then the last part is the font. So that combines all those things that we did before. And so this is a little bit from your book about this property. It's supposed to be in that order, although you will see it work when it's not in that order sometimes. So the minimum font property must include a font size and a font family. So this would be the minimum. Here's the size and here's the family. It makes it invalid if you put them in the wrong order or omit some of those. But the rest you can stick in that order, and you'll see the rest of those properties. So you don't have to put them all in, but you do have to have at least a size and the font family. So one thing I didn't mention in the sizing options is we used EMs, but you could use pixels, which probably most people don't do because it doesn't resize in a lot of older browsers. So the EM unit is kind of the standard, but there is this other system where you can use keywords, and they go from extra, extra small, small, medium, large, etc. And the default size is medium. I don't think a lot of people use them, but it is possible to use it that way. Using those keywords, you can also use larger and smaller, which are relative keywords, meaning it shifts the size to a little bit larger or smaller. So here's the keywords extra small to extra large. They're kind of like, I always think of like clothing sizes. And yeah, so those are options as well, but you don't see them used too much. But they would work if I went here and changed this size here to smaller. Now that text got smaller than the default size. Or I could say extra, extra small, which sounds pretty dumb, but you can do that. Extra, extra small, and there's extra, extra small, and it looks terrible because it's distorted, at least in this browser. So those are possibilities, however, so I'll put it back the way it was. There we go. All right. That is the font shorthand property. A little bit tricky, so be careful about that one with the order and things. The next one is font 8, and this one is text transform. So I'm going to say text-transform, and I'm going to say uppercase. And it makes all that text uppercase, even though it wasn't typed that way. If we look down at the actual text here, where's font 8? Here's font 8. It's just typed normally, uppercase, lowercase, etc. But it makes it all uppercase. So your choices for this one are none, capitalize, I spelled that wrong, lowercase, or uppercase. So if I say capitalize, now it capitalizes every word even though it's not typed that way. Or I could say lowercase. I'll just use the code hinting so you guys don't have to watch me type. I could say lowercase, and it's all lowercase even though it wasn't typed that way. So those are some options for text transform. The next one, I know you're thinking how many are there? There's about 15. So maybe you want to pause the video and get a sandwich. I'll wait. Okay, you're back. How was that sandwich? Probably better than the one I just had. All right, so we're back to font 9, and this one is text decoration. So I'm going to say text decoration, and I'm going to say line through. So what does that do? It puts a line through the middle of your text. Your choices for that are none, underline, overline, line through, and blink. So we can take a quick look at some of these. Let's do overline. There's overline, it puts a line on top. Underline, you can probably figure that one out. There's underline. Be careful with underline though, because why? It may look like a link, so be careful with that one. There's even this one, which is left over from the horrible old days of the web, which is blink. It doesn't show up in this editor, but if we looked at it in a browser, it would blink, which is bad usually. So don't use that one unless you have no class. No, I'm just kidding. If you want to use it, you can use it, but be careful with it. So I'm going to go back to line through for that one. The next one is one that we've covered already before, but I'll throw it in here, which is background color. So you can put a background color behind text, obviously. So we'll just say background color, and I'll just make it gray. Remember, you can use 3 numbers if we want. So now I have a gray background color. And you can also use RGB values, and a different video tells you how to use RGB alpha to make it transparent. So you can go check out that other video for that. All right, so now we're on to some new ones. I'm going to call these text because they're more related to bodies of text, or to sort of containers, I guess. But anyway, I'll just call them text. So this one's called text 1, and this one is going to do alignment. So we can say text align right, and it makes our text go to the right. So your main options are left, right, center, or justify. You can probably figure out what they are. Left goes to the left, right goes to the right. Center is centered, which I would be careful with using because it does not usually look that great and function that great as far as readability goes. So be careful with center. And justify forces both lines to be left or right, flush with the left or right side. So let me show you what that looks like. This is from your book as well. So here's left aligned, here's right aligned, here's center aligned. The problem with center aligned is it creates these ragged left and right margins, which makes it a little hard to read. Also feels kind of static and formal, so unless you're doing like a poem or an invitation, it might not be a great idea. This is justified, which puts a straight left and right margin on both sides, like you'd see in a magazine or a newspaper. The problem with it is that most browsers do not really know how to break up text or hyphenate it to make the line, the spacing between the words, correct all the time. So you get sort of these, see how the spacing is a little bigger between these words? So that could be a bad thing because it's just doesn't look that great and makes it a little harder to read as well. So that's why you should be careful with justify, especially if your container is very thin. These spaces between words can get really bad. If it's longer lines like this, it's probably not as big a deal. All right, so that is alignment. The next one is text 2, and that one is text indent. So I think we may have seen this one before already, but this is a way, I think we have for sure, to move over the first line of text. So I'm going to say text indent 5EM, and you'll see that this line is moved over 5EM. It's only going to work on the first line. It's not for the whole container. So if you just want to do the first line, as if you'd see in like a novel where they indent the text or some writing styles, you can use text indent. If you want to put a margin on the side, you can do what we've done, I think, before, which is use margin. So on this time, I will add a margin on the left and right. So this is text 3, and we'll say margin dash right, and we will say 5 pixels, and we'll do margin left. And we will say 30 pixels. So now this is on this sentence here, margin, this sentence uses margin right and margin left. So it has a text or a spacing or margin on the left of 30 and a margin on the right of 5. So you can do that to add spacing for more than one line. This, again, would only work on one line. This would work on as many lines as you want. So margins are part of the CSS box model, which we'll talk about more as we go along, and that is the basis for a lot of CSS layout as well. So we have 4 more. Let's do 4 more. Let's do text 4. This one is going to use shorthand for margin. So we're just going to say margin, and we'll say 30 pixels, 40 pixels, 50 pixels, and 20 pixels. And I'm also going to add a background color so we can see what's going on. Let's just do gray again. There we go. All right. So this has margin shorthand of 30, 40, 50, and 20. What does that mean? So what this is doing is, instead of saying margin left, margin right, margin top, and margin bottom, which you could, like we did on the previous one, this does them all at once. Sort of like the font shorthand we did earlier. So the way it works is, the first number is the top, the second one is the right, the third one is the bottom, and the fourth one is the left. The way I remember it is, it's like a clock: top, right, bottom, left. So that specifies the spacing on all four sides. Other people remember it as treble: top, right, bottom, left. I use a clock. So that saves you a little bit of typing. Another thing that will happen is you can just do it with one number. So now it says 30. That means it's going to be a 30 all the way around. If you do it with two numbers, the way this works is the top is still 30 and the right is still 20, and the opposite sides are the same. So we have 30 here, or 40 here, sorry, on the second one. 30 here because the top is 30, so the bottom is 30, and then 40 on the left because the right is 40. So you just fill in the opposite side if it's missing with the side you did specify. If you want to be really lazy and just leave off one and you did three numbers, it would be 30, 40, 50, and then this would be 40 again because this side was 40. So that's how that works. And that's also used for CSS layout. Well, margins are used for CSS layout. Four more. Sorry, this is kind of a long one, huh? This one is line height, which we saw earlier when we did the shortcut for the font property. But this time we'll just put it in as its own property, and we'll say line height of, let's do 2 EM so we see it pretty well. So that is this paragraph right here. We said line height of 2, which is double the normal spacing between lines. That's all that does. And that's called leading in typographic terms. Now we're going to do text 6. Oh, we're down to the last 3. This one is letter spacing. And I'll put in 1.3 EM. And that does just like what it sounds. It spaces the letters out. So if you want to add a little space between letters, that's way too much probably. And a lot of typographers would say never do that because fonts are all made with specific widths between them, so they look good. But if you do want to adjust it, that is what letter spacing is for. All right, text 7. This one is word spacing. Very similar to letter spacing, except this is space between words instead of letters. So now we have word spacing of 1.3 EM here. So that spaces out these words by extra space in between the words, and as opposed to in between the letters. Just backing up for a second, one thing about letter spacing, I may have said that was leading. Line height is leading. Letter spacing is a lot like tracking. Tracking is a typographic term that means the space between letters in a group. Individual spacing between letters is called kerning, and that is not technically possible as far as I know with CSS, adjusting individual space between individual letters, unless you did a bunch of spans with some letter spacing on it, but that would be kind of a mess. But letter spacing is a lot like tracking, which is sort of like kerning over a larger space. All right, so last one. Thank goodness. Here we go. So text 8, this one is vertical align, and I'm going to say superscript, or just super, sorry. And this one is a little bit different to see. If you look down at the bottom, it has a paragraph. This is the paragraph we're on. It says vertical align, and that's inside of a span that has text 8 on it as a class. So I didn't put the class on the whole paragraph because you wouldn't be able to tell what was going on. So the class of text 8 is only on the vertical align word or hyphenated word inside of that paragraph. And if you look at it, here's what it looks like in the browser. Vertical align is slightly above the surrounding text. So that's why it's only applied to that one word. So vertical align, your options are baseline, sub, super. There's a lot of them. They basically move the text up and down relative to where they were. The ones that you're probably going to use or maybe use are SUP, super, for superscript. That's how you might write like H, or some text that goes slightly higher. And then the other one you might use is subscript. So you might use H2O and things like that. If you're writing some formulas for chemicals and things, you might use those. And there's some others, and you can check those out. But there's a lot of options there. Okay, I think that is it. Sorry that one is kind of involved, but that is a lot of ways to manipulate the look of text, which really is what CSS is good at. And I think that will do it.